Hello to all our attendees today. Thank you for joining. It's wonderful to be able to greet you on hello. Oh, good to see folks. Oh, there's folks I haven't seen in a little while. How fun. Hi.
Nice to see you, Kelly and Lisa.
Yeah, so good to see you. You got a haircut since I last saw you.
I know. I was just going to say,
Yeah, I chopped it all off.
Awesome.
Love it.
I also just got back from Japan. If we want to talk about things that are big and exciting.
Wow. That's a big shift, big change.
Yeah.
Hello. Awesome. You guys are a prompt group today. I appreciate that. I feel like it's been a couple of events since we've had a good group right at the very top of the hour. So I am thrilled to see everybody joining. So good to see you. Hey, Bob, nice to see you.
Hey, Kelly.
Bob.
Hey, everybody.
We have
Welcome.
a great crew. Good stuff. Just letting folks join here. But we do have a lot of content. So I think I might just go ahead and get us started, and we'll probably have some more folks that come in. But thank you everyone for joining us today. On behalf of the Conscious Capitalism Boston chapter, I'm thrilled to welcome you today. And I am gonna just very briefly share my screen and kind of get us kicked off here. And so here we go. I will properly share my screen and say thank you for joining us. I think today's going to be a really fun event. We have two wonderful speakers who will be guiding us through leading well from within, mindfulness tools for conscious leadership. And I will more fully introduce our speakers momentarily. But we like to start our events with a reminder just about our purpose and our vision as the Boston Conscious Capitalism chapter. And so our purpose is to connect, educate, and inspire leaders and workers to consciously build businesses that positively impact the world. And our vision, we will foster the fundamental transformation of capitalism to a healthy, balanced way of doing business for all people and the planet. And then moving on, I like to give a quick shout out to all of our corporate members. I won't go through them by name, but we are so grateful for their support and an ongoing collaboration with us in the Boston community. And so here's just a quick peek at the dozen corporate members that we have as part of our chapter. And so very fun to be able to highlight them and their commitment to the philosophy of conscious capitalism and implementing that in their organizations and in our community. And so for today, pretty simple agenda here. I am going to stop sharing momentarily, and I'm going to formally introduce our speakers. They are going to take us through mindfulness tools that are going to be really valuable, I think, for all of us. And then we'll leave some time at the end for Q&A. And so at the end, if you would like to speak a question, feel free to raise your hand. I will bring you off of mute, and you can ask the question directly to our speakers. Alternatively, feel free to put any questions you may have in the chat, and I will moderate the Q&A section and kind of bring those questions to our speakers. And so with that, let me just give a very warm welcome and thank you to our speakers for joining us today. First, we have John Engel. He's the Associate Director at the Traumatic Stress Institute, where he leads a team that provides training and consultation services to organizations that are implementing trauma-informed care. In private practice, John designs and facilitates leadership and organizational change initiatives that support mission-driven organizations. So a lot of alignment there with John's work and our Boston chapter. John's also a certified workplace mindfulness facilitator, and he supports mental, emotional, and physical well-being through a variety of mindfulness programs. John served as the executive director of Merge for Equality previously, and they have a mission to change the way we raise boys, and for 10 years authored a monthly column in the Daily Hampshire Gazette, The Fatherhood Journey, to promote public and private conversations about fatherhood. And then our second speaker, who I'm thrilled to also introduce, Cheryl Zoll. She's a PhD and she's CEO of Tapestry Health. That's a community-based organization that provides planning and sexual health services, HIV counseling and testing, and a variety of other health-focused initiatives in Western Massachusetts. Cheryl previously served as the executive director of Amherst Survival Center, where she led a team that transformed a grassroots organization that was undergoing a transition and emerged as a thriving agency serving 4,000 low-income residents in Western Mass. She's also taught at MIT as a linguistics professor, as well as done that at Amherst College, Hampshire College, and the University of Iowa. Welcome to you both, and I am going to hand the mic over to John.
Great, thank you for the introductions, Kelly, and to Lisa for the invitation to be with all of you today, and to Cheryl for your enthusiasm about being part of this as well. Just we've got an hour together, so let's have some fun. Let's explore together and see what we come up with. I'm going to do some screen share and kind of hold that up, but I just wanted you to know that, you know, really what we're doing today in some ways is exploring a topic that has deep roots and wide breadth. And so I just want to start us off by having Cheryl and I to say a little bit about what excites us about being with you today on this topic, the intersection of leadership and mindfulness. And Cheryl, when I reached out to you about this, what came up for you around, you know, saying yes to this opportunity? What feels exciting or important to you about this topic?
Yeah, well, I don't have to tell people here that leadership can be very stressful, and there's always a million things going on, and it's our role to figure out a way to lead with equanimity and also to be really authentic in our leadership. So I was very excited to have an opportunity to kind of think through that, but especially to be able to have that conversation with you all, because as I'm coming to learn about conscious leadership, the overlap between the principles of conscious leadership and mindfulness are profound. I find mindfulness practices to be really grounding as both a form of self-care, because we have to take care of ourselves, but also as a way of making it possible for us to be present for people in the way we need to be present in order to really lead skillfully. In my own leadership, I see myself, I don't know if you can see my arms on the screen, but if people ask me about my leadership style, I always talk about being a container, you know, providing that space in which really good work can happen. And part of that container metaphor is really about control, right? We need to be creating boundaries and establishing a space in which really great work can happen. But part of leadership, and this is sort of a paradoxical thing, is that we also have to know when to step aside and when to let go of control and when to recognize that everything isn't in our control. And so for me, for that particular paradox in leadership, mindfulness has also been a very powerful tool. So I love thinking about that and talking about that, and interested in hearing what you all will have to say as we go along.
Well, thanks, Cheryl. And again, thanks for your willingness to be part of this today. We are, my enthusiasm and excitement, I think, comes from the bio that Lisa and Kelly pointed to at the beginning here. And I'm just really passionate about the intersection of leadership, thoughtful, conscious leadership, however we want to frame it. And I find mindfulness to be one of really effective tools that helps us realize that aspiration of conscious leadership. So let's move things along a little bit here. The desired outcomes, which I think were clearly communicated in the announcement for this, are really about just describing how mindfulness can be a support to conscious leadership, what mindfulness is and isn't, as well as some particular techniques that we might experiment with. We'll do a little experimentation here, and then really connecting to the experience that Cheryl offers as a CEO. And the way we're going to do this is, time permitting, there'll be three brief practices where we do 3 brief mindfulness practices. There will be 3 doses of some information, and there'll be 3 doses of Cheryl reflecting on her experience with the intersection of mindfulness and leadership. So that's really the architecture of this session, is those 3 practices, 3 doses of information, 3 reflections from Cheryl. So, and if there's lots of engagement from all of you, which would be welcome, we might get through 2 of those rounds instead of 3, but we'll see where we're at. We'll give it a try. So just want to invite all of you, and the invitation really is just that. It's an invitation to participate as you wish. And that participation could be merely observing. If you feel so moved to participate in the what it is that I'm outlining, and you want to experiment with that, also just invite you to pay attention to your experience and notice if the experience feels unsettling in any way, if it feels upsetting or dysregulating, or if it feels good. Just notice those things. If you want to be off camera when we do practice, if you want to stand up and move around, if you want to divert your attention outside of looking outside your window, all of those things are available to you. There isn't a set way. I'm just going to offer some guidance. And if at some point you want to stay with the guidance, great. And if you want to deviate from the guidance, that is all part of the process. So that being said, just invite you to notice the posture you're in. I mean, imagine many of you are seated. That is just fine. You can be seated, you can be standing, you can be lying down. We're going to do a practice for about 3 minutes or so. And if you're in the seated position, just invite you to, if you are able to, imagine sort of that energy bringing you to a sort of sitting nice and upright, but without forcing it, without being rigid with your posture, but just a nice upright posture. And to notice, if you are able, the sensation of your feet in contact with the floor, if that's available to you. So again, you're noticing your back sort of upright, if that's possible, and then your feet in contact with the floor, maybe even wiggling your toes to remind yourself, wow, my feet are still there. I haven't thought about my feet since this morning, but they're still there. And then noticing the sensation of your seat, your buttocks, the back of your thighs on the chair where you're seated, if you are seated and are able. And simply noticing too the sensations of your hands as they're in contact, perhaps folded one in the other, or resting on your thighs, or perhaps resting on a tabletop or arms of chair. And so I just invite you to notice these 3 points of contact: your feet, your seat, your hands. And notice that they're always there and available. And we're noticing these parts of our experience without judgment, hopefully. It's just however you're experiencing those parts of yourself. Sometimes in mindfulness, there's an invitation to notice your breath. And so if you want to notice your breath, that's available as well. Simply the sensation of breath coming into your body, into your chest, down into your abdomen, and noticing the exhalation of breath. And now for just about 1 minute, we've made these contact points. I'm just going to invite you to be simply present with your experience. And anytime your mind begins to wander, and it will, and all that means is that you're human, because that's what human minds do, is they wander. It's one of the things they do. Anytime you feel your mind wander and you notice it, I invite you to bring your attention back to either your feet, your seat, or your hands, or if your breath, if you prefer. So we'll just take a minute to just be in this posture. And again, if you notice your mind wandering, simply invite your mind without judgment back to one of those sensations. Bring yourself into the present moment experience. And when you're ready, I just invite you to bring your attention back to the full Zoom room where we're all located. Perhaps offer yourself some internal expression of gratitude for taking a moment to just notice your body, to notice your body experiences and sensations. And I welcome you to enter into chat any word or words that express the experience that you just had, anything briefly that you might want to share about what was that experience like of noticing what we're referring to here as contact points, the points where your body was in contact with your surroundings. So I'm seeing in chat a couple of calming responses, centering, presence. I'm looking at my other monitor here as opposed to up front. It would be totally fine if somebody I felt irritated, or I felt unsettled, or I felt fidgety. That's okay too. And that's one of those things about mindfulness. We often shifting my mind from busy to present. Beautiful. That means, Andrea, that you are doing the work, right? I didn't get enough sleep. You're noticing that. You might start to yawn or feel sleepy, or yeah, exactly. So it's a window into our experience that's happening whether we pay attention to it or not. We're simply paying attention to what all morning we may not have been paying attention to. And it's like, oh, look at that. Yeah, that reminds me I didn't sleep well last night. Or that reminds me that my mind is bouncing around. It's a little bit like going to the gym and we do cardio to build our cardio capacity, or we do weights to build our bone density and muscle strength. But with mindfulness, this particular form of mindfulness that we did today, this morning, this afternoon, this moment, was about helping build the capacity for our mind to be present in the moment. So that's the capacity we're building when we do mindfulness practice on a regular basis. There are lots of forms, I'll mention a few of them, but this one we did right now helps build that focused attention capacity that we have. Also, noticing how my mind gets easily distracted. Congratulations, Stefan, you are officially human. Your mind was getting distracted. Anybody here want to put their hand up and say that my mind didn't get distracted at all in those 3 minutes? Probably no volunteers on that one. The question is, how many times did your mind get distracted in those few minutes, right? And then not judging it, just kind of laughing about it, smiling about it, finding, oh, well, that's good information. All right. So thank you for engaging in this first experience. I'm going to attach that experience to the next one when we get there in a few minutes. But first, I want to move us along to some more content, and this includes a poll. And I think I can launch the poll. Actually, I'm screen sharing. Would Kelly, you be willing to launch the poll for us? So I don't have to stop the screen share. It's essentially reflected on the slide here. But this poll is really asking or inviting us to respond to the question, how many of these things have changed for us in the last 2 years? We're talking about things in the context of work and as leaders. And your options here, you can pick as many as you want. So just invite you to respond to this poll. What of these following things have changed for you in the last 2 years? Where you work, when you work, how you communicate at work, how you connected, how connected you feel to your team, etc. We have about 22 of us, so I'm just kind of tracking our participation here. And it looks like we have a good number of folks responding. We're at about 15, 16. See if we can get a couple more to respond to our poll here before we close it out. You can start to imagine what the poll results might look like based on your experience as a leader of those around you. We have 17 now. That's probably pretty good because I'm not filling it out. We're at 18. When you're ready, Kelly, we can close off the poll and then share the results. So there we go. Can everyone see that? Give me a wave if you can see the poll results. Yeah, so this doesn't seem like a big surprise to me. Anyone here feel surprised by these results? The last 2 years have been quite unique in many ways. There's a lot of things going on in our world when we think about our world broadly, our communities, our organizations, our role as leaders. And this is a context in which we are aspiring to be conscious leaders. So being conscious within a context of lots of change. So what is some of the change or the impact or the implications of some of that change? Well, probably lots of things, and some of it may be positive, but we hear a lot about these things lately too, right? Epidemic of employee stress and burnout, toxic workplace behavior, mental health challenges at home and at work, and the intersection thereof. Loneliness at work, people not feeling connected to those that they work with and others. And feel free to chat others into chat that come to you as the impacts of recent changes. And of course, we want to notice that there are likely some positive outcomes of these many recent changes. Many of us have enjoyed the opportunity to work from home some of the time, at least, where we're not commuting into the office and the benefits that that provides. So it's not all sour grapes. It's all not negative impact of these many changes. But from a leadership standpoint, these things on this slide create an opportunity of how do we lead and how do we cultivate conscious leadership in a context of these many changes and their negative impacts. One of the things that we can think about here, and I'm really sort of pulling from the work of Mark Mears and his publication, The Purposeful Growth Revolution, 4 Ways to Grow from Leader to Legacy Builder. This is a resource that came to me from Lisa that I believe is a resource known within your conscious capitalism circles. How many of you are familiar with this author and this particular book? A few of you. If not, it seems like it's a good resource from what Lisa had shared with me. And there's a distinction here that the author makes that I think is really valuable, and that is we can think about that prior slide and the negative impacts of all these changes through the lens of the Great Resignation. We hear a lot about the Great Resignation, the mass resignations, the low engagement, the low satisfaction, the quiet quitting. And now what is it? What's the latest thing about Monday? A bare minimum Monday or something like that, right? Is that the trending? So we add that to the list after quiet quitting. So that's real. That's a frame. That's a meme. That's an experience that people are having. And I like the way that, again, Mark Mears, The Purposeful Growth Revolution, has put the Great Resignation themes next to the Great Repurposing. So we can see the Great Resignation through the lens of the glass is half empty. We can also flip it around and see it through the lens of the glass is half full. How do we go from our current experience to seeing this as an opportunity to pivot more or to lean more into purposeful growth, purposeful self, purposeful work, and purposeful life? So that's a bit about our context right now. And I want to really kind of turn my voice down and make space for Cheryl and her wisdom, her human wisdom, her CEO wisdom, and just invite her to respond to this question: how has mindfulness informed your leadership during times of rapid change?
Thanks, John. Well, I checked off all 7 of those things in the poll, so I'm a little alarmed right now. But anyway, we are all in a time of rapid change, and as leaders, it's incumbent on us to stay focused when things are swirling around us and to be flexible and to listen and to pivot. And this really requires us to be very grounded. That's what I find. I'm going to share with you my secret practice that I have found to be very powerful. If you've ever looked at the self-journal model, it's derived from that. And it's basically something I do every morning. And I'm going to show you, I have a little tiny piece of paper here. It's not a big deal to do it, but it really can transform the day when there are so many things going on. I do try to meditate in the morning, but I'm more disciplined about this practice. So I just start by going through a couple of categories of things that I want to make sure I think about at the beginning of a day. And the first one is just basic gratitude. What am I grateful for today? And the reason that's so important, I'm sure many of you might have a gratitude practice too, is it really helps your mind lift from like the thing that kept you up all night to understanding that there's a wider world out there and that there's good things going on. So this morning, I was especially grateful to our operations director, who was willing to jump into a very difficult problem and knowing her solve it. So I made sure I took a second to think about her. And then I was just really happy that the sun was shining because it hadn't been shining for a couple of days. Then the second thing I do is state an intention for the day. I'm Jewish, and I actually came to meditation through a Jewish practice. And the Hebrew word for that is kavanah. So I call it a kavanah, but it's an intention. And usually that is something that is very grounded in mindfulness. So for example, my kavanah, my intention this morning was to pause and listen. But I actually have a little list of things that I often put for kavanah in my phone, and it could be kind, steady awareness, mind and body in the same place is another one. Listening and pausing is a very frequent one. Letting go. Know that the sea will hold you up is one, sometimes for more desperate times. So I've done my gratitude, I have an intention, and that's when I turn my mind to work. Then I look at kind of what's happening in the day, what's on my list. And if you're like me, your list has 1,000 things on it. And I don't know if you get up every day thinking like you're going to do all 1,000 things, and then every day you're disappointed at the end of the day that you didn't. And that really, I find, grinds me down quite a bit, and it keeps me from being present for other people. So I look at my list, and then I name what my work priority is for the day. And never have more than one or two of these. So today my work priorities were making sure I was ready for the webinar, and also to work on strategic planning. That's not a task, right? Because if I had on my to-do list strategic planning, then I also would feel like I had failed at the end of the day. But I know that the important things to me today are this moment with everybody now, and then the strategic planning that Tapestry is in the process of. Once I have that in mind, then I will look at the tasks, and I will look at my calendar and figure out, okay, here are the goals that are important to me today. How much time do I actually have to work on those goals? And then I will just put the tasks that I know that I'm going to be able to get to that day. And sometimes that's just one thing. Like today, I'll have 25 minutes to work on strategic planning, but because I've thought ahead, like I'm going to have 25 minutes to work on strategic planning. If I do that 25 minutes, I'm going to feel really good at the end of the day. I met my goal. I did the thing that I said I was going to do, and I won't leave the office feeling like, oh, I should have done these 100 things, because you all know in reality, we can't do all the things that are on our lists every day. So
Excellent.
this practice, oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Cheryl.
So this practice allows, it sort of brings together a lot of the things that come through mindfulness. There's the gratitude, the intention that's just a way of being that you're reminding yourself of periodically during the day, and just a very real appreciation of what's possible. And then by doing this, you're managing your own tasks well, and it gives rise to more skillful leadership in the sense that it sets a tone for your employees that you're also not expecting them to do more than is possible in a day. So to the extent that you're modeling this and sharing this, you create a workplace culture in which people also feel like your expectations are realistic and that they can leave the workplace at the end of the day and feel satisfied. I've found this, it's a very simple thing. It takes like 5 minutes and it's been really life-saving for me.
And what I'm hearing, partly you're sharing there, Cheryl, is there are many forms and practices of mindfulness, and you're integrating a couple of them together, but you're making it a ritual. So it's a daily practice that you return to each day. And I find that with any new habit or any new desire, finding the difference between how do I add this new thing to what all the things I'm already doing versus how do I integrate it into something that I already cherish and I already do on a regular basis. If what I cherish and do on a regular basis is take a little reflection time in the morning, then maybe I could just add 3 minutes of mindfulness, sitting mindfulness practice to that, because I'm already there, I'm already doing that, as opposed to, gee, where in my day am I going to have this new thing? So I like the habit part, the ritual part that you've created around it as a powerful way to start your day. Yeah, great. So let's move along. And so we're going to dig a little deeper into this whole mindfulness idea. And I want to set us in that direction with another practice. And some of the things I said in that initial grounding exercise with the contact points is really about noticing. And we could even say the mindfulness practice or sitting meditation, those types of things is really, at some core level, about noticing our experience in a particular way. And I'll say some more about that in a moment. But I also want to call out, and we're going to do another 3-minute practice, that the idea of noticing those contact points in meditation circles, which are not just circles, but in groups or in descriptions of meditation, we often talk about something called a support anchor. So oftentimes in yoga or in meditation, if you've gone to a formal meditation or using an app, there's this invitation to bring your attention to your breath. You notice your mind wandering, return to the sensation of your breath. In reality, our breath can actually be triggering and overwhelming to us. And if we're holding a lot of tension or stress, or we've had some really difficult or even traumatic experiences in our life, breath can be pretty triggering. And actually, instead of bringing us into a calmer state, it can dysregulate us. It can throw our nervous system either into shutdown or into overwhelm. And so I just like to point out that it's important that folks have an understanding of what does it mean to use a support anchor, and what are the various support anchors that we might explore. So when doing a 3-minute sitting meditation, when our mind wanders, we could bring our attention to our breath, and maybe that works well for us. We notice our breath, and then we go back to this being present. And before we know it, our mind is wandering, and we say, oh, there's my mind wandering again. I'm going to return to noticing my breath. Well, the more we do that, we want to notice, am I getting more calm? Am I getting more present? Or am I getting more agitated and overwhelmed? If you're feeling more agitated and overwhelmed, we might say, okay, I'm not going to pay attention to my breath. I'm going to pay attention to my seat on the chair, or my feet on the floor, or my hands, one in the other. Those are internal anchors. They are internal to us, and they can be used as support to keep us present in the moment. There are also external anchors. So my office right here, I'm looking right out a window, and in the backyard, there's a pine tree. There's actually 4 pine trees that I can see. And if I'm doing meditation or I'm leading a session like this, I often use the pine tree that's right there, right outside my window, as an external anchor. If I'm starting to see my mind wander and drift, then I might just attend to the pine tree for just a second to bring me back to, oh, there's that pine tree. Pine tree is still there. And I just kind of go back to my experience. You can use sound as an external anchor. Whenever your mind is drifting, you can bring your attention back to the sound, the ambient sound in the room, the sound of the dryer in the other room, the sound of the heater buzzing in the background. So those are external anchors. So using a support anchor is simply a way to keep us in the present moment when we're doing meditation and our mind begins to wander. And again, we're doing it without judgment. Any questions about that idea of a support anchor? Anybody have a question that they want to shout out off mute, or they want to chat? Any question about the use of a support anchor? You've maybe have done this before, but not had the word support anchor used. But in essence, that's how breath is often used, but we just want to make the point that breath is one of many options. I'm not seeing any questions. Okay. So I'd like to invite us back into a 3-minute practice again. We're in a seated position, or if this time you would like to stand, or if you'd like to lie down, any of those options for 3 minutes, and just invite you to be present. You can have your eyes open, you can have them closed, you can have them partially open. There is no right or wrong with that. Sitting, standing, lying down, no right or wrong with that. It's all just an experiment in creating a posture and a position for your eyes to be present. And I just invite you, as you settle your mind and notice whether it's settling or if it's drifting, to experiment with an anchor that you've not experimented with before. Whether that be breath, or something visually in the room, or visual outside of the room, or sound, or one of those contact points. And I'll just offer that reminder a few times, but we'll just do this for 3 minutes. To just be present with your experience without judgment. As you continue to practice, again, invite you to notice your mind is wandering when it's wandering, and without judgment, bring it back to one of those support anchors. If you've been practicing with your eyes closed, invite you to consider practicing with your eyes open, just to see what that experience is like, if you would like to. I just noticed that my breath was not moving along. It was as if I was unintentionally holding my breath. And so then I use that as a reminder to come back to just noticing my feet on the floor. So as we begin to close out our practice, when you are ready, you can bring your attention back to the full Zoom room. If you chose to have your camera off, I invite you to bring it back up if you would like. And again, just invite you to share in chat or off mute. What did you notice? What did you notice about that experiment? What was it like to practice using a support anchor that was sort of new to you? Stefan is saying easier to anchor with eyes open. Great. So that was true for you in this moment, in this exercise. Julie's agreeing. And I think it's just fun to experiment with eyes open, eyes closed, eyes partially open. And one day you may find it supportive, and another day maybe it's less supportive. So just allowing ourselves to experiment with that Much more practice with breath anchor, hard to anchor with eyes open. Okay. Typically anchor with my breath, and tried using a painting in my space today, and it was really pleasant experience, which I was surprised by. Love the idea of external anchors. We so often get stuck in our heads. Fun to focus on listening, no consistent sound. I fell asleep again. That's great. And you noticed that you fell asleep. So that's great. So yes, the invitation here going out of this session today is to play around with this stuff, play around with the posture, eyes open, eyes closed, sitting, standing, lying, play around with different support anchors, internal support anchors, external support anchors, and be willing to be open to, so what is it that my body is like drawing me to do today when I practice, and not feeling that it always has to be the same thing. And certainly not feeling that to be doing mindfulness, I have to practice it this exact right way, because there's no exact right ways. There's just options. And we want to broaden the set of options. Love using visual anchors. Focused outward for the first time in a long time. Wonderful. So a few bits of information, and then we'll bring Cheryl back in. So mindfulness is not. Mindfulness is not tuning out, being relaxed, stopping your thoughts, being passive, or just being otherwise chilled out, right? Mindfulness is being self-aware. It's being perceptive and curious. It's responding instead of reacting, which we're going to unpack a little bit more. It's staying focused on what's happening. It's connecting deeply with ourselves and others. There is often a sort of a misconception that mindfulness is about being calm. And it's true, mindfulness practice can bring us into a calm state. It can also make us aware of just how uncalm and how agitated and unsettled we are. And that is the part of being present in the moment with our experience without judgment. And so mindfulness does not equal calmness. Mindfulness equals being present in the moment with our experience. So mindfulness is paying attention to your present moment experience with an attitude of openness to curiosity. This is essentially a quote that comes from Jon Kabat-Zinn. I'm sure you're familiar with that name in some cases. Jon Kabat-Zinn, about 45 years ago, he developed and launched what has become known as mindfulness-based stress reduction at the Medical College of Massachusetts. And his initial work was focused on working with individuals that were experiencing recurring pain, and pretty much the rest of the medical community in that system said, we don't know what to do with these people, so we'll send them to you. And thus MBSR was born and is now the most widely practiced and tested sort of Western mainstream adaptation of mindfulness that there is. There's many practice in the schools and curricula, but this is one that's pretty pervasive. It is secular. It is, of course, based on the original teachings of mindfulness that come from Buddhism, Hinduism, Taoism, and other traditions dating back 2,500 years ago. Some say 5,000 years ago. But mindfulness in the current sort of American context in a secular way, through the words of Jon Kabat-Zinn, it's really about paying attention to your present moment experience with an attitude of openness and curiosity, or in other words, non-judgment. Meditation, and you can do mindfulness in lots of different ways. Mindful walking, you can have a gratitude practice, you can have a journaling practice, you have a sitting meditation practice, some of all that or other. Meditation is referencing a way of exercising that increases your capacity. So that reference I had, like taking your mind to the gym. So the meditation part is a particular activity that we're using to strengthen our mindfulness presence. And so then let's line this up with conscious leadership. The conscious leadership pillar within your conscious capitalism really dials in on these capacities of self-awareness, systems-mindedness, flexibility, strength, and empathy. And mindfulness just, I think, so nicely matches up with the qualities of conscious leadership as defined within the conscious capitalism framework. And so it's about being self-aware, perceptive and curious, responding versus reacting, staying focused, connecting deeply with others. So one more slide here before Cheryl comes back in. There is an emerging, rich and expansive field of empirical research looking at the impacts of mindfulness on the mind and body. And some of those findings have more robust data to support the claim than others, because it's a newly and rapidly evolving field of study. But it has, functional fMRI or functional MRI imaging has allowed, for example, researchers to look at what's actually happening in the brain while doing different types of meditative practice, to see how different types of meditative practice impact different parts of the brain and therefore different parts of our experience. So that's just one slice into the fascinating research that's going on. But when we think through the lens of general benefits of mindfulness, we can consider emotional benefits, cognitive benefits, physical, as well as behavioral benefits. And this slide captures some of those key benefits. So it's building off of this that I want to invite Cheryl back in and just hear a bit about Cheryl's experience. Cheryl, your sense of how has mindfulness benefited you personally and or professionally? You told us a little bit about your practice early on, but what are the types of benefits that you really have experienced through these practices?
Yeah, I thought it might be the most helpful to just give an example of an experience that is probably a common experience to many of you, and certainly common for me, where mindfulness has really been beneficial. And that's the kind of situation where something goes wrong and you think is probably your fault, and all the things that you go through when that happens. So I was thinking of a situation a few years ago. It's a few years ago, but I could give you a situation practically every day for this, but this one, where we do a lot of work with people who use drugs, and including needle exchange. But one day we got some press coverage from WBUR, with a picture that made it look like people were bringing big bags of heroin on site, which is illegal. So that wasn't happening, but that was what the picture looked like. And I actually hadn't seen it, but then I got a call from our major funder, someone very high up at the Department of Public Health, who was just outraged that we were having these people bring the drugs on site, and it was going to be terrible for the program and the perception of the work that we do. And I was really worried that we might lose funding as a result of this. So my first impulse in a situation like this is like freeze, panic, try to figure out who am I going to blame for this. I don't know if you do this, but sometimes like thinking about worse natural disasters to kind of put it into perspective. But none of those things really will move you forward, right? They just keep you in a kind of a frozen, panicked state. And I found mindfulness as a practice, you start to know things deeply that are helpful in situations like these. So once that initial panic is there, what I try to do is start by just being aware of what I'm feeling about that thing, acknowledging like, wow, this feels horrible. Where is it in my body? Like just feel the feelings that are connected with this event and not try to push them down, because I don't find that that's very helpful in solving these problems. A second piece of mindfulness that's really beneficial is that you start to see that nothing ever stays the same. So if you were paying attention to your breath, you see that it's always changing. If you're paying attention to a sound, it's constantly shifting. And for me, something that's grown out of mindfulness practice that's been very helpful in situations like this is just knowing that I'm not always going to feel the way I feel now, that this feeling too is going to change. So it feels horrible. I've got this feeling, but it is going to change. And then the third thing that really I think derives from this practice, and it kind of goes back to when John said, congratulations, you're human, is that it's a moment, and this, it takes a pause to do this, but just to recognize you are a human being and to let go of the perfectionism that just traps us. And like, if I were a good leader, this never would have happened. This mistake never would have happened. And just like recognizing that that might be going through your head, and just knowing that there is no perfection in this work, that we are always doing the best that we can. And I feel like this, really being able to sit with that and understand it, comes through the mindfulness practice, because part of what mindfulness does is it creates a sense of connection between a practitioner and the context and the world in which we're living. We're all humans, and we're all trying to function as well as we can. So I have found that just by taking a minute and kind of allowing myself to feel these things and going through this, then I get out of the frozen panic, and then I can accept responsibility for what happened in a productive way. And then I'm able to address the situation. So in this one, we worked with the funders, made sure that they had the right information. We tightened our press policy. We paid more attention to what we're allowing to be covered. And we came up with a solution that has benefited the agency since then. And because it was grounded in a practice of mindfulness, we were able to do it without judging, and with creativity and freedom that allowed us to come up with solutions that really worked for us. And it was fine. It actually was fine. But I really, in these kinds of situations where it just seems like the world is going to end, mindfulness, the things that I have derived from mindfulness practice really allow me to move through, and in ways that have been very powerful.
Great, thank you, Cheryl. Being a member of the community where Cheryl's agency is based, I have an appreciation for the delicate balancing act on these hot button issues such as needle exchange and others, and how this plays out. And my observation experience of Cheryl's leadership has been she is quite conscious and balanced in how she uses these practices. So I'm delighted I get to see that through the public eye, Cheryl, and not just when we're working together. So I know that there are some questions, a couple of them coming into the chat. I want to get to those, but I'm going to kind of hang off for a moment and move us into this third section. And so we, again, have done 2 practices. I don't think we'll do a third one given our time, but I, again, want to just surface this idea that meditative practice, mindfulness practice can be about focusing our attention on the present moment. So we build that capacity to be having focused attention, right? So it allows us to pause. So we go from that to this idea of reacting, moving from reacting to responding. And so when we experience stress, we experience overwhelm, it's not uncommon for us to have emotional reactions. And as leaders, if our stress or the stress around us, the stress of those we supervise, the stress of those with whom we work with, the stress of our board members, the stress induced by the media, as Cheryl's example, or funders, or all of the above, if Cheryl had let her stress move her to immediate emotional reactivity outwardly, she tapped into what was she experiencing emotionally and physically internally before she went public with that, right? So we're looking at the natural tendency to react emotionally to stress. And in a business context, we can often see this through the lens of business as usual, getting perpetuated by our default or our autopilot. We just, when a crisis happens, we use this protocol and we address it this way. And it becomes, in some cases, just that autopilot without conscious intention. We just go through these motions. Mindfulness offers us a bridge that maybe it can be thought of as a pause opportunity. So when we experience stress, if we have a mindfulness practice, even if we don't take a moment in that space to practice mindfulness, but we have a mindfulness practice, remember, focused attention practice expands our capacity to be present in the moment. So when we experience stress, we apply that and we have enhanced awareness. Oh, this is what I'm noticing in the moment, just like Cheryl illustrated when this press release came out or this press coverage came out that was not favorable. So mindfulness can be a buffer to both the reacting emotionally and the autopilot response so that we respond intentionally when we experience stress. And rather than autopilot, we respond in a business context and a leadership context with a sense of being alert and a sense of being curious. And that was the kind of response that we heard from Cheryl in talking to other members of her team and being creative together and working in a space that was not about the emotional reactivity. So there's a sort of final prompt here that we're going to have Cheryl respond to, and that is about responding versus reacting. But her prior response, I think, nicely sort of covered both of those. And I want to leave a few minutes for questions. So I'll just close with this quote on the slides of this idea of creating a pause. Viktor Frankl, popularized by Stephen Covey, is noted as saying the following: between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. So mindfulness in this context is engaging in a practice that helps create the space where we then have the option, the opportunity for choice and intention, and that we can grow our sense of freedom and purpose from that, which I think is a nice alignment with the conscious capitalism vision. So to recap, our workplace is experiencing change. Change is ever present. Mindfulness is about paying attention to our present moment and being curious. There are benefits from mindfulness. Meditation is one way to engage in mindfulness, and we can strengthen our conscious leadership capacities through those practices. We introduce this contact point exercise that you might consider doing 1, 2, 3, 5 minutes a day, once, twice a day, home office, meetings, airport, Zoom. You can explore mindfulness apps. There's many of them out there. Liberate, Headspace, Calm, and you can practice this focused attention meditation that we have done. And I'll just say before opening up to questions that this was just a thin slice of how we might think about mindfulness and how it connects with conscious capitalism, but we can do work around the intersection of mindfulness and resilience, or communication, or psychological safety, many other topics. And so happy to be available to explore other topics with you. I want to return to the chat and some questions that may be there. I think there was a question about the difference between trance state of mind and mindfulness. And I don't have particular expertise in trance states of consciousness, but my general understanding is that one could be in a trance. And a trance is that we are experiencing reality through some sort of altered state of consciousness. I'm in a trance. I'm in a distant space. I've taken myself to a mountaintop. I've taken myself to the depths of the ocean. I've taken myself to a field. I'm somewhere else in my cognitive experience, my overall being experience. That's my general understanding of what one might mean by trance, whereas mindfulness is being present in this moment, in this space, with this body, as opposed to sort of distance through a trance-like experience. So I don't know how that matches up with anybody else's response to that question, but that's what comes to mind for me. Thanks for the question, Reverend Anthony. How does that land for you? Looking for other questions there.
And there's one more that came in. What are the top 3 ways to turn mindfulness into a habit? It's a great question.
Be a good blog post.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I think Cheryl gave us a nice 3-point. I don't know what the top 3 are. I think it'd be pretty individualized, but what comes to mind for me is to, again, identify a particular kind of mindfulness practice that feels good to you and that you're energized by, and think about at what point in your day do you already have a habit you do where you could integrate it with that habit so that it feels like an extension of something you're already doing. And I would also just invite you to be curious in exploring the other options of mindfulness or apps or different practices so that your habit stays fresh, that you get to see that there's other ways of engaging in mindfulness and keep it fresh and see what works for you and not feel like one thing is what you have to do all the time. So those are some initial thoughts in response to that. Looks like we have couple more messages. Yeah, okay. Great. So as you exit, I welcome you to, again, be in touch if you want, or to maybe just enter into chat a word or two about what's one word to express how you're feeling in this moment about mindfulness based on this experience we had together, as a way to just kind of bring closure to our group. Reverend Anthony's feeling alert after falling asleep a couple of times. I'm glad that that was restorative for you and that you're feeling alert, ready for your next step, energized, supported, better. Excellent. So again, feel free to enter a word or two in the chat. Let us know about your experience in this session. Thank you for taking your time to be here. Thanks so much, Cheryl, for your great leadership examples and practice examples, and to Lisa for the invitation to be here, and to Kelly for getting us all tech-wise set up.
Yes, thank you, John and Cheryl. We really appreciate all your efforts here.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Really appreciate all your work and the wonderful practices you shared with us. I think everybody's leaving on a high note. We're getting great feedback in the chat. So thank you. And I guess we can just say, have a great rest of your day, everyone.
Indeed. Thank you.
Yes, take care.
See you all soon.
Bye now.
Bye.